Welcome to The Debate, and welcome to Cognitive Dose, where our core mission is, curing blind spots and shattering cognitive bias.
Yes, absolutely. And for today's show, we're establishing a bit of a deep investigation dynamic. We are acting as investigative journalists to really examine Ken Kisienda's book, Creative Selection, Inside Apple's Design Process During the Golden Age of Steve Jobs.
Right. And my role here today is going to be objectively laying out the core framework. I want to build the foundation of Apple's success exactly as it's presented in the book.
And my role is to hold the research dossier. I've got a collection of critical, multidisciplinary notes, and I'm going to use them to methodically expose the systemic realities and logical fallacies hiding right beneath that surface-level narrative.
Sounds good. So let's dive into the setup. The basic premise of creative selection is that Apple's massive success didn't come from, huge focus groups or rigid data analysis.
Right. No sprawling research departments.
Exactly. It came from a Darwinian loop that Kisienda calls creative selection. It's this continuous cycle of prototyping, so making a demo, getting extremely specific executive feedback, iterating, and repeating.
A kind of survival of the fittest for software features.
Yeah, exactly. And the book champions 7 essential elements for this: inspiration, collaboration, craft, diligence, decisiveness, taste, and empathy. But I want to focus on a specific case study to show how this worked in practice.
Oh, the keyboard derby.
Yes, the iPhone keyboard. At the time, typing on a flat sheet of glass was, it was considered basically impossible. Kisienda entered this internal pitch process, the keyboard derby, and his original prototype didn't have single-letter keys.
Wait, really? It wasn't a standard QTAY layout?
Nope. Because fingers are clumsy, he designed a keyboard with multiple letters clustered onto larger keys, like an old telephone keypad almost. But executive Greg Christie pushed back really hard.
Let me guess. It failed his subjective taste test?
Pretty much. He demanded single-letter keys, the standard QTAY layout. So, to solve the usability issue because the keys were too tiny for human fingers, Kisienda built this brilliant thing called a pattern skew algorithm.
Okay, break that down. How did it work?
Well, it autocorrected based on surrounding keys. It was a heuristic, highly subjective solution to human behavior. Behind the scenes, the software invisibly resized the hitboxes of the keys based on the probability of what letter you type next.
Oh, wow. So if you hit T, it makes the invisible boundary for H much larger.
Exactly. It intercepts human clumsiness. And this ties perfectly into the philosophy of taste that Kisienda champions. The book explicitly rejects empirical, replicable UX validation.
Right, the anti-data stance.
Yeah. He actually proudly mocks Google's famous A/B test, the one where they tested 41 different shades of blue to see which one got more clicks. Kisienda argues Apple succeeded precisely because it relied on unquantifiable taste and the intersection of technology and the liberal arts, rather than cold data.
Well, that sounds great in theory, but let's look at the systemic reality here. I'm going to open up the research dossier, because when you dig into this framework, it creates an absolute epistemological crisis.
How so?
By rejecting empirical validation, like A/B testing, in favor of executive taste, they're relying on non-falsifiable heuristics. It's essentially pseudoscientific. You end up with a methodology that has a replicability index of 0.
I see the danger there, but wait. If we look closely at the underlying assumption here, doesn't the Safari page load test, the PLT, completely contradict their hatred of algorithms?
Ah, the PLT, Don Melton's famous metric.
Right. Because when they were building the Safari web browser, it sounds like they used absolute tyrannical data metrics. No code was permitted if it slowed down the browser by even a fraction of a millisecond. That's entirely empirical, isn't it?
It is, and I'm glad you brought it up because the dossier points this out as massive hypocrisy. This framework masks its lack of rigor by pretending to be above data.
But the PLT proves they absolutely relied on strict empiricism for back-end engineering, where physics and math can't be debated.
So they selectively apply the science.
Exactly. They aggressively dismiss data for UI design just to maintain the autocracy, the mystique of a single executive's reality distortion field. It wasn't about better design. It was about maintaining total control over the things you could subjectively argue about.
That's a pretty harsh critique of the internal culture.
It gets harsher. The dossier has a whole angle on the normalization of a highly toxic autocratic culture. Based on these notes, the organizational structure functioned essentially as the software equivalent of a North Korea dictatorship.
A dictatorship? But wasn't that intense pressure simply the crucible required for excellence? I mean, think about the directly responsible individual, the DRI concept. Isn't that just really good, focused project management?
Good project management doesn't erase professional agency. The DRI system, combined with extreme secrecy silos and these draconian non-disclosure agreements, created crushing isolation for the engineers. You're put in a silo, completely cut off from peer support.
But that prevents leaks and keeps the product vision pure, doesn't it?
At a massive human cost. The dossier highlights a deeply disturbing anecdote from the book. After a high-stakes demo, Steve Jobs literally shouts through a closing door, "Thanks, whoever the fuck you were."
Right, I remember that passage.
And rather than recognizing that as a degradation of human dignity, the workforce was psychologically conditioned to accept it. They reframed this mistreatment as a sign of noble laser focus. They traded basic human respect for consumer product innovation.
I hear that, but again, these were elite engineers. They chose to be there. And the provider research points out a massive blind spot, sure, but we can't deny the iPhone changed the world. Doesn't the final product validate the process?
That brings us to the final finding from the dossier. That assumption that the product's success validates the process is a textbook case of false causality, driven by severe survivorship bias.
False causality? Explain that.
We only see the successes. We don't see the invisible graveyard of brilliant ideas that were summarily killed simply because an executive was in a bad mood or their taste was off that day.
Well, every company kills ideas. You have to filter things out.
Yes, but you should filter them with data, not dictatorial whims. And this methodology suffers from extreme weird cultural blindness. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Right, demographic bias.
Huge demographic bias. Designing software based purely on the intuition of a homogeneous group of wealthy Cupertino engineers completely ignores the empirical needs of a diverse global user base.
But the iPhone did succeed globally. It scaled across cultures and languages perfectly.
It succeeded in spite of the dictatorial high-stress process. The organization had basically unlimited capital and the absolute elite echelon of global engineering talent. When you have that much leverage, elite engineers will succeed even if they're navigating an abusive anti-data environment.
So you're saying the success wasn't because of creative selection, but simply because they out-resourced everyone else with sheer talent and money?
Precisely. To assume it was the magic of the abusive environment is a massive logical fallacy.
That is a fascinating way to break it down. And it really synthesizes why this is so dangerous for modern startups or, UX cowboys who try to mimic this approach.
Oh, it's a guaranteed disaster for them.
Yeah, because if you try to replicate the anti-data autocracy, if you just rely on your own taste, but you don't have Apple's unique historical resources and talent pool, you're just going to fail. You can't just act like a dictator and expect an iPhone to pop out.
Exactly. And I think that leads to a really sobering, thought-provoking final observation for today's show.
Go ahead.
We must be incredibly careful never to conflate the remarkable endurance of oppressed engineers with the supposed brilliance of the system that oppressed them. There really is no neat, happy resolution to the human cost of the specific era of innovation.
That's a powerful point. The beautiful product doesn't justify the brutal machine. And this is exactly why we continually use this kind of rigorous analytical approach on the show. It's how we build our mental immunity against these seductive corporate myths.
Well said. We always want to look beneath the surface. Make sure you subscribe to Cognitive Dose so you never miss an investigation.
Until next time, keep questioning the blueprint.